this morning and thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join us to talk about the Kearney Krameria Street Neighborhood Bikeway. My name is Riley Lemie, and I'm a senior city planner with the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, or DOTI for short. So again, wanted to just quickly say thank you for your time this morning, and we'll jump right in. So we have a quick 10-minute presentation that we'll give this morning, and we'll try to keep our talking to a minimum so that way we can hear from you, which is the most important part of the discussion today. But we'll just have a 10-minute presentation that will talk about what the neighborhood bikeway is. But the main purpose why we're here today is because as part of this project, we've been talking about the parking on the block on Kearney Street between 22nd and 23rd, and whether it makes sense to have it as front end angle parking as it exists today or back end angle parking. And we want to make sure that we have those conversations with the businesses and hear from them and hear from you and what works best with the operational needs of your business before we are talking about making any adjustments or changes to that. And then if there's any other safety concerns that you have just from a mobility perspective on Kearney Street, we're happy to hear about that as well. So I'm going to jump right into talking about what a neighborhood bikeway is. So this is a project that is funded from the Elevated River Bond Program, which is building out bicycle as well as other mobility infrastructure all throughout the city of Denver. This particular project, Kearney Krameria Street, is a project that goes all the way from, or is proposed to go all the way from East Smith Road to East Virginia Avenue. And it is designed to be a shared street. So what that means is that bicycles share the street with vehicles. So it is not a dedicated space for bikes, but rather meant to be a street that is comfortable to share between both bicycles and vehicles. What it is designed to do is to improve crossings as well as make the street safer for everyone that uses the street to travel on. And again, really focusing those improvements at intersections where appropriate. So as I mentioned before, a neighborhood bikeway, it's not a dedicated space for bicycles like you may have seen in other areas of the city. Again, it's a shared environment between where bikes share the road with vehicles. But what is done instead are improvements mainly at intersections that are designed to help make the street safer and intersections safer both for bicycles and vehicles. So some of the things that we might do are adding new wayfinding signage or pavement markings just to remind people that the street is shared. We may also do improvements that are designed to slow down speeds and calm down traffic at busy intersections. And then we will also do things that make the street safer for pedestrians and bicycles to get across the street. So these types of streets are really designed to make it easier for everyone who's walking, biking, and driving to better be able to share the street and to prioritize their safety. So just to kind of summarize what a neighborhood bikeway is really designed to prioritize safety and again, trying to create improvements primarily focused at intersections that are designed to help prioritize people walking and biking. Neighborhood bikeways maintain the existing parking throughout the corridor because they are not dedicated space for bicyclists. And again, benefit everyone that uses that particular street because they're designed to discourage speeding and improve safety at the intersections. So I'm going to hand it off to Charlie, who is going to kind of talk to you about or discuss with you the main reason why we're here today, which is to have the discussion with you about what works better for your business in terms of front angle parking versus back end angle parking. So Charlie, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Very good. Thanks, Riley. Nora, can you give me a quick sound check? Riley came through pretty good, but a little choppy. Am I clear enough?
You are clear, Charlie.
Okay, thanks for that. Good morning. My name is Charlie Alexander, and as Riley said, I'll go through some of the considerations we're thinking about for the 2200 block of Kearney Street. So I'll walk through both an image and some pros and cons of both front-end and angled parking. and then tell you about another project in the area that we had some questions about, and then we'll get into questions in just a few minutes here. So front-end angled parking, this is obviously an image of the 2200 block of Kearney as it exists today with front-end angled parking. Some of the pros and cons of these, starting first with the pros, this is a pretty common and traditional arrangement for on-street angled parking. And in particular, it's easy for drivers to maneuver into the parking space, right? We've probably all done this before, and it's a very straightforward maneuver. The problem, and sort of starting with the cons, or the challenge of this type of parking, is that it's difficult for drivers to actually maneuver out of the parking space. And so, if you've ever been backing out of these spaces and you've got cars next to you, you know that you don't really have any visibility of oncoming traffic before you start backing out into that traffic. So whether that traffic is another vehicle or someone biking, there's definitely a safety concern associated with backing out of those spaces. One other thing that we've heard about this is that whether it's open doors in the vehicles or sort of the trunks or hatches in the back, they tend to point out at the street, which just means that a lot of loading activity sort of happens in the travel lane rather than at a safer place. So people are sort of standing in the street to sort of load the back of their vehicles, or if they're letting kids out of the car, the doors open and the kids are sort of pointed into the center of the street rather to a safe place. And then lastly, and this is sort of the same as, or a summary of the first two considerations here, is that generally speaking, this sort of parking is considered less safe than the alternative that I'll talk through in a minute, both for people in vehicles, because they can't see when they're backing out, as well as people biking. So going into the second, sorry, Riley, you're controlling the slides. There we go. Going to the second option that we're considering is what we call back-end angled parking. So basically just the, sort of the opposite of front-end angled parking, where people actually back into the space, but then they, move forward to exit the space. This is an example of back-end angled parking in Denver on 7th Avenue in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, just sort of east of Lincoln Street. So some of the pros and cons of this, starting with the pros first, drivers here have good visibility of traffic, whether it's other vehicles or people biking, when they're maneuvering out of the parking space. And for that matter, when they're maneuvering into the parking space, they're doing so with clear visibility of traffic that's behind them. So overall, the visibility equation here is better. The second kind of benefit of this as compared to front-end parking is that those trunks or those hatches and those open doors really point people to the curb, which is safer and a little bit more straightforward for whether people are loading goods or other passengers like kids. And kind of owing to both of those facts, the overall safety of back-end angled parking is greater for people than front-end angled parking. To go through some of the cons on this, it's just less common. It's definitely a newer treatment. It's been around in different cities for at least over a decade. But at the same time, it's definitely not what has been done for 50, 60 years. So people likely have a little bit of a learning curve, and there's some signage that is often installed to help make that a little bit easier. So part of that is just people picking up on what is the proper way to park when the parking is configured this way. The other thing that often comes up is just the concern of actually maneuvering the vehicle backwards. And just to sort of speak to that for a moment, that sort of backwards maneuver into the parking space is more or less the same maneuver that people make when they are parallel parking. So it's not necessarily something that the drivers aren't doing. It's just a little bit different way of thinking about it. And that's sort of that second bullet, that it is a little bit more difficult for drivers to maneuver into these spaces, but it's roughly the same as when people parallel park. And then the last con that we wanted to put out here for consideration is that with gas-powered vehicles that have tailpipes, the tailpipes tend to point at the sidewalk. And if people are idling or leaving their vehicles running for some period of time, it can be a bit of a nuisance to people on the sidewalk, whether they're just passing by or whether they're dwelling for whatever reason, whether that's because there might be cafe seating or otherwise have some activation of the sidewalk realm. Next slide, Riley. So those are all the considerations related to front-end versus back-end angled parking. I want to take just 1 minute to talk about another project that's going on in the area, because I think Nora heard a couple questions about this when she was handing out flyers to businesses on the block. And that's the McAuliffe International Safe Routes to School Improvements Project. So this is a project that's in process that will add sidewalks along several streets in the area near the 2200 block. So that includes a pretty significant stretch of 23rd Avenue, some segments of Kearney Street itself north of the 2200 block, and then also segments of 25th and 26th, as well as some pedestrian crossing improvements at Kearney and 23rd. And those, Riley, are shown on the next slide, if you can skip ahead for me. Yeah, so I believe there's already marked crosswalks across 23rd Avenue at this location. So the Safe Routes project will, in addition to building sidewalks, it'll also add pedestrian refuge islands at this location, as well as some additional street lighting. And the purpose here is really kind of twofold. One is to improve safety for people walking, which is done by kind of breaking up the crossing so that people crossing can cross one lane at a time. We call that a two-stage crossing, sort of engineering jargon for how that happens. But nonetheless, the research on this has shown that there's a definite safety benefit for people walking if we configure the crossing this way. The other thing that you can notice is that people driving east-west on 23rd Avenue will actually sort of need to move to the right and then back to the left to navigate around these islands. And there's some transition there so that it's not a really abrupt maneuver, but nonetheless, what we call that deflection, sort of that left to right and right to left movement, it does have an effect of reducing vehicle speeds. So that would be a benefit or will be a benefit of the project as well. These improvements are all funded through a separate funding source and are in design right now. And I believe the current construction timeline is to break ground in 2022 on these improvements. So last slide here, Riley said we were pretty short and sweet. We want to hear from you all on the phone in discussion about the parking options we presented. If you have a preference and why perhaps you have that preference, we're wanting to hear about that. And then we're also looking at a project like this as an opportunity to make other improvements in areas like this, where maybe there are other safety concerns or other circulation issues that you'd like us to explore and potentially complete all at the same time as we're going in and doing a project like this. The last thing I'll mention before we break for discussion here is that the overall quantity of parking, the number of parking spaces, is roughly the same, whether we do front-end or angled parking. So the actual quantity, number of parking spaces shouldn't really change. It's really just sort of those pros and cons of the different configuration that I mentioned before. So with that, Nora, I think we've got a pretty small group here today. So I think we can just, all have discussion together and hopefully everyone can unmute as necessary. But Nora, I don't know if you want to kind of help me facilitate this piece.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And if we could have folks introduce themselves, that would, I think, help us orient where you are on the block and what your perspective might be.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Larry Dardano. I have the Dardano's Gymnastics, but I own the shopping center on the east side. And I was the president of the Business Association in 1992 when we got the bond issue in Denver for streetscape and beautification. And I was there when they put in all the improvements, trash receptacles, bike racks, benches, pedestrian lights. And my only concern, if I can just jump to that, would be the distance from the improvements to the curb. And when you back in, I think most vehicles are 3 to 4 feet of bumper to wheel distance. I have a feeling that if it wasn't measured, that people will be backing up into the improvements. So that's one of my concerns. So it needs to be looked at carefully.
Hey, Larry, can I just ask a question about that to make sure? Yeah. So if I understand your concern correctly, or something, and a suggestion of something that we need to potentially design around, it's that vehicles have a little bit more overhang on the back than the front. So
Correct.
if people are like backing all the way in to where their rear wheels hit the curb, they'll sort of hang into the pedestrian realm or the improvements that you guys worked really hard to get out there.
Yeah, and we do have to maintain them as well.
Got it.
Skipping back a little bit, when we got the improvements, the learning curve you talked about, there was one, definitely. Kearney is probably one of the widest streets in Denver. And we petitioned to get on one side head-in parking. And then I said, we need it on the other side. And they thought the street wasn't wide enough, but it was wide enough to allow it on both sides. I remember 3 accidents. They were fender benders. When we got the improvements in '92, there weren't as much activity and the traffic was a lot faster on Kearney Street. So we had people pulling out cautiously, but always maybe going a little bit too fast when they backed out. But as I go through there day to day now, people take their time and traffic has slowed down a lot. So I'm thinking there needs to be a good look at this, because changing that sometimes brings new problems. And I think we've worked through problems. Most cars have backup indicators, video. So we've got some assistance there, whether you're head in or back in. So that probably will be a push as far as concerns. But my concern definitely is if we do this and we don't measure and try a trial run in an area to see if people are going to back right into the improvements, or somebody could be sitting at the bench and I think it's only 2 feet to the curb. So definitely the cars would be sticking out farther into the street. At this point, they can go pull right up and have their front tires hit the curb and it's done. But when you're backing in, a lot of people have trouble. We have a lot of pickups that come in with extended cabs. So I'm thinking you're going to have more cars sticking out into the street than you had when we had head-in angle parking.
Thanks for that. Sorry, just furiously taking notes while you're speaking, Larry, not ignoring the camera.
I don't know how to get my picture on there. I tried. I don't know if it's on there. Is it on there?
I don't think so, unless others
good.
But your audio is loud and clear, and those comments are super helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
And that's a really great perspective. So we really appreciate that. That's something that we'll kind of think through a little bit on our team. And
we did have one other thing that I thought about that I wanted to mention to you. When we first had this, we had people that actually backed in and parked because it took us a while to get the street painted properly.
Okay.
And it was in the wintertime, and the cars that did that, I don't want to say I know who they were, but they came from across the street, not Dardanos. Anyway, they got stuck in a snowstorm and they couldn't get out because there's a little bit of a slope. Most cars had rear wheel drive. And once the gutter filled up with ice, they were stuck because they needed more force to get up over that slope on a frozen street, and they were stuck there backwards. So I remember that. So a lot of cars have all-wheel drive now. Things have improved. Technology has improved for vehicles. Mm-hmm. But I think when I look at the picture that's on the screen now of the van, looks like a Hummer or a Jeep next to it. Yep. Probably no problem there, but I think the van could have an issue. And the van is sticking out probably 4 to 6 feet from the curb into the right of way to where we got the pavers, because they tore all that out, buried the utilities and put in pavers. And I know that that van right there will be sticking into the sidewalk area or right on top of one of the improvements that we have, including a pedestrian light. And the only way to avoid that is for him to pull forward into the street. And vehicles come in all sizes right now, and people use Kearney Street, very accessible. We do have a lot of deliveries that come in, and that sometimes is hard, but they come and go and we seem to find a way around it. because we have businesses that require big trucks for servicing their goods. So I think that's about all I had to say, but I'm thinking those things need to be looked at because I have already been through it, and that was 30 years ago.
Great, thank you, Larry. I see a couple other participants from the corridor, Abby, and then maybe a representative from Great Expectations. I don't know if you want to chime in.
Yes, if I could. My name is Kate King, and I'm one of the owners of Great Bex. And I really appreciate the safe routes crossing that you guys are going to implement at 23rd. The number of accidents that we've seen, even this summer with the bike camp from our neighbors across the street. I do really appreciate that. I think that'll be a good thing. I'm concerned about the back in angled parking for the reasons that Larry stated. And also I think that if you were to watch that street on a busy Thursday or Friday night when Table's restaurant is jumping, when the new restaurant across the street is open, when Cake Crumbs is open regular hours and we are busy, the amount of traffic in that area and the potential for accidents is even greater. We watch accidents today from people not paying attention and backing out. We have a fair amount of customers that we share with the hair salon where the people do prefer to back in and do today. And the accidents and the or almost accidents that has caused is kind of alarming. So I don't know how many of you have kind of sat over there and watched what was happening, but it's happening even with the way that the parking exists today.
Sorry, just reaching for the unmute button. Thank you, Kate. Just to follow up, in terms of some of the crashes or near misses that you're seeing, is that sort of associated, I guess, kind of two questions in my mind, just want to make sure I understand. Is that sort of associated with people front end parking and there's just a lot of people when it gets busy on the corridor and that sort of contributes to it? Or is it people that are backing into some of the existing parking spaces sort of in an irregular configuration that is sort of unexpected and that's causing some issues? Or is it a little bit of both, or am I misunderstanding?
No, it's a little bit of both. I think that, you know, when you have a larger population and it gets busier, I think that, you know, there's the tendency. We've been watching the bike camp that's been happening all summer on our block. And, you know, these are kids. And so they're not maybe as focused as an adult bike rider, but watching just kind of what happens and the potential near misses that we've been witnessing is a little frightening. And Larry's right. We have big semis delivering to our store 4 or 5 days a week. And CG's, our neighbor with the pet food store, has big trucks coming. So, you know, we do have deliveries, and that this might make a little bit more interesting. I'm not solely opposed to it. I would like to see some more research done before it happens.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. It's very helpful. Abby, I think you're the only other participant on the phone today. If you want to introduce yourself and chime in.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning to everyone. I'm Abby. I'm a co-executive director of the Art Garage. And I wholeheartedly agree with everything that has been said, particularly the accidents that do happen down here on right on Kearney, people turning off of 23rd. And I see a lot because of people backing out of those spots closest to Kearney Garage. And I think that's due to them not being able to see, especially those more inside parking spaces, not being able to see cars turning onto Kearney. So with the back in parking, I do think people will be able to see more cars coming. But that's kind of my only comment. I do think that, especially those Thursday night, Friday nights, it's just so much congestion. And we just see accidents all the time. So just trying to mitigate that and eliminate any other problems if we do switch it. So.
Okay, and our garage is on the west side, is that correct?
We're on the east side.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kearney garage is on the west side.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All east side, I believe, today, which is just fine. Okay. Riley, Nora, Michelle, do you have other questions for our group here?
I was actually curious, Abby, about pickup and drop off for your location being on the corner there. How do parents pull in, pull out, drop kids, pick up kids?
Yeah, so we have angled parking right to the west of our building. And then we also have a parking lot that has two entrances off of 23rd. So it's kind of like, but we don't have an exit only and an entrance only. It's used as both. So it's nice that we do have that parking lot, and parents definitely use both. They use the angled parking on Kearney, and then also our parking lot. Our parking lot's fairly small for how many students we have. So it definitely does have some congestion that happens during our heavy traffic times.
Do you have any safety concerns related to that congested time, particularly on the Kearney side of your?
Well, the other thing is that the sidewalk runs through our parking lot also. So just looking for pedestrians, it can be chaotic, but I think people are slow and able to, to take their time to be courteous to one another. So we don't see a lot of accidents or problems. We're able to avoid that. So that's good.
That is good. The more dangerous point is folks turning south onto Kearney from 23rd. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's some coming out of our parking lot, crossing both lanes of traffic across 23rd. Like if they were heading east and turning across, just because 23rd can be very busy, especially at rush hour.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other concerns, just as we're thinking about how we can improve the street for bicycle and pedestrian safety? Are there any other safety concerns just in the general area that we should be thinking about or addressing as a part of this project?
I have a question about 23rd and Kearney. Is there, I heard that there might be more developments. I just wasn't sure what that was. We have that crosswalk now. However, cars do rarely stop. I don't know if like a light system or something else to help, especially with kids coming from McAuliffe. There's a lot of kid walking traffic there.
So there's a project that's planned. I don't think it's been installed yet, but it's part of a Safe Routes to School project, which is 23rd and Kearney, and it would add what we call a pedestrian refuge island. And the idea behind this is to slow down vehicles, to get them to stop here for pedestrians that are crossing the street. It also helps to narrow the street a little bit to make it safer for pedestrians as well. So this project is supposed to be going under construction soon if it hasn't already. That's one improvement that's being looked at.
Okay.
And Riley, just one thing to Abby's comment on that, in addition to just like the safety statistics before and after with an improvement like this, just the measure of what we call yield compliance, which is the likelihood of drivers yielding, goes up quite a bit when you put in the medians, even without lighting. So there's different thresholds at which, based on traffic speed and volume and everything, we start to look at the lighting. And 23rd is sort of in this zone where these islands seem to be the most appropriate treatment for the characteristics of the street.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can take other questions. Well, I don't know about, Abby, if you're asking about like nearby development projects, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm not sure that was your question.
It was mostly about the crosswalks.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and I heard that there was going to be more done than just what is there now. So yeah, that answered my question.
Got it. Great. Other questions from Kate or from Larry? Otherwise, Riley, Nora, we can wrap up pretty early and let these guys get on with their days probably.
I did have one more question, if I may, about deliveries and the logistics of that. How do trucks actually deliver goods? Do they back in, or are they pulling in front ways and then unloading towards Kearney?
We have, it's Kate again. We have a variety of ways. I mean, we're working with about 100 different suppliers. So your guess is as good as mine. We do have back door access that we ask them to use, but oftentimes if they're not comfortable in navigating the narrowness of the alley or whatever the situation is, but we are one of the few that has the back door access. Everybody else is front door. So it's both. Typically, you'll see it kind of earlier in the day rather than at rush hour. So they'll pull, up either in front of the store or along the side in the parking lot. But it's a variety of different ways.
And do trucks back in so that they're unloading directly onto your sidewalk, or are they carrying their goods around the truck?
Both.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I had just one concern for the restaurants with sidewalk seating. What would be their issues? Because most of them are getting pretty close to the curb. And the city seems to kind of approve that now. It looks like we're going to live with that the rest of our lives, which is good. It's like Europe. I like that. But have you talked to any of them other than this Zoom meeting?
So I walked up and down the block and did not have a chance to talk to Amy at tables. She wasn't there, but had a short chat at Neighbors, and his reaction was, we can adapt. He wasn't jumping for joy at the prospect, but also seemed to indicate that they would be adaptable. But we haven't had a chance to talk to tables.
Nora, was Amy from Tables on a previous public meeting we'd had? I'm trying to remember.
She actually attended the larger public meeting on the corridor from top to bottom.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Larry, I think your question is a great one, and we did. Nora obviously went out and tried to speak to every business owner she could on the corridor, and we're recording this so that we can share it with others who didn't find it convenient to participate today as well. But I think I'll go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I just said it was a good call.
Okay. I think a lot of the concerns that you've mentioned in terms of just the proximity of some of the streetscape elements to the parking spaces, is probably going to be similar for them. And then, in the pros and cons, I mentioned the potential for tailpipe emissions sort of being pointed more towards the curb rather than the street. So that's usually the concern I've heard before, particularly from business owners or property owners or tenants that really have activated use of the sidewalk realm.
Good.
And have you spoken with Kearney Garage at all too? Because they just move cars all the time and use a lot of the parking spaces for the vehicles that they're working on. And I just feel like they would have probably a lot to say.
I did actually end up standing in the office and talking to their front office crew, and they didn't seem to express a lot of concerns about the parking spaces themselves. Their big concern was speeds on 23rd. Mm-hmm. They really had a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
But it is, of course, always worth circling back to make sure that all the elements of the proposal are understood. But that was their big concern with the crossings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Any other thoughts or questions?
I don't think so.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to meet with us. I know everyone's super busy, so we really do appreciate it. We will, of course, follow up once we kind of have do further evaluation on our end and some further discussion, but really do appreciate your feedback. This is super helpful to get your perspective, especially as the businesses that live and operate on the street. So that is great for us to have. And if there are any questions, like I said, as Charlie mentioned, this recording, we will make the recording available. So we will put that on our website, and then Nora will be able to distribute that out as well. If there are any other questions or thoughts for us, you can always email us at bikes@denvergov.org. So again, bikes@denvergov.org. You can email us there if there's any other thoughts or questions that come up, or from either yourselves or from your colleagues or neighbors along the street. So again, appreciate your time today, and we'll hope to chat with you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.